Hello dear Sinceres, welcome back to my channel for all things astrology, spirituality and holistic. And so today we're going to talk about the full moon in Libra that is going to take place on the 6th of April. And it will be at 16 degrees and 7 minutes. And this full moon is also opposing the Sun conjunction with Chiron and Jupiter. So we'll have also this kind of Jupiterian and kind of Chiron influence to it. With this conjunction, we'll see it reflecting a little bit of a light on our wounds, but also giving us a sense that allows us to access a deeper wisdom and be more spiritual. As Libra sign is all about relationships, we might feel that we want to learn about the wisdom of our relationships. And having the Sun exalted in Aries is also about not losing ourselves in our relationships. We want to make our relationships more conscious, more spiritual, in a way that still respects our individuality, our personhood. Not just all about me, but not all just about the other. The full moon always reflects this axis of polar opposites, that we are seeking to find a certain balance, a little bit and much different. It's nothing to do with the North Node, South Node, but it's a little bit having this polar of opposites that we try to find a balance for. In this case, Aries and Libra, we have this kind of trying to balance these two opposites. But also this full moon is a bit of a prelude to the line of eclipses and the change of the nodes that is going to take place this year by going into Aries, from Taurus to Aries, because it always goes in a reverse way in July. And so this polar of opposites between Libra and Aries speaks to us about relationships with other people, relationships with ourselves. How much are we being to another person? How much are we being to ourselves? Is to find the balance between being in a relationship without losing oneself in it. Where is it okay for me to keep being myself and think of my needs and place my boundaries? And when is it time to make my voice heard, look at the boundaries between myself and another person, assert my needs and wants? Is it also, where are we going too far on our selfish pursuits and forgetting to have consideration for others? Where are we just pushing for our needs, our wants, our agenda at the expense of other people? Where are we not listening to the other? Where are we only thinking about ourselves as the center of the universe, as the main person, the main character of our story that the world needs to serve? I love looking at these kind of polar opposites in astrology because they usually find a balance in the center, where a teacher of mine used to say is the 13th sign, because is the center that balances all the zodiacal signs, and that is where the 13th sign is located. This Libra sign is also very much this symbol of the scales. When you look at the glyph that represents the Libra sign, it is represented for these two scales. So it's very much about balance. But it also makes a lot of sense between this polar opposite between Aries and Libra, because when we think about it, is this kind of finding a balance between ourselves and another person. It is in Libra that we finally start to have the oppositions between signs. They did not exist before. When we go into the 6th sign Virgo, there's still not an opposition if we don't take into consideration all the other signs, if there were only existing signs from Aries to Virgo. But when we reach Libra, we finally reach the opposition sign. We have the 7th sign that finally causes this opposition, being represented by scales that would seek to find this balance, seek to find this equilibrium between two polar opposites. But it's in Libra as well, where we have to leave our own little world and meet what is out there. We need to meet the other. It's an Aries, the self, meeting another Aries, another self that is not contained in us. It's the one to one, or the 1 + 1. And the esoteric meaning of Libra is the paradise. It's the 7th day of creation, where Adam and Eve were joyfully playing in paradise before the fall. It represents the harmony, fairness, where all is in this state of elation and perfection. What do we say when we fall in love? What do all the music, films, media shows us about romantic love? This idea of perfection, of heaven and absolute happiness. But also about completion, isn't it? It's quite interesting. Aries is one, is the I, the self, but it is in the other one, the Libra sign, the seventh sign, that it will find completion. Also, if we look at the elements of the opposites in astrology, we see that each element is friendly towards the other opposite element. So air and fire get along, and earth and water also get along. But if we look at how they are organized in a chart, usually you have earth opposing water or air opposing fire and vice versa. So isn't it interesting that it seems that somehow the elements of the opposites have this kind of tendency to want to support or feed or to give some kind of motivation to the other opposite element. It is as if air makes the fire burn stronger and the earth gives container to the water. And in some kind of way is the same with Aries and Libra. Somehow Libra can make the fiery Aries burn stronger, and the fiery Aries can keep the Libra warmer. This is an example of this dual dynamic that we can be more of ourselves when we meet the other, but we have to allow them the space to also exist in our world. So fire is not trying to take over air, because if it does that, it goes extinguished. And air is not trying to take over fire, because if it does that, it will extinguish the fire. So it's about finding this balance where both can feed each other, both can support each other. So Mars and Venus are the rules of Aries and Libra, and they are the forever mythological lovers. However, in mythology, they were also not just lovers, but they were fighting constantly with each other. And in astrology, they are actually enemies of each other. In the house system ruled by Libra, the seventh house, we find also the enemies, the ones we need to confront. And why is it that there is this mix of love and war, of romantic heaven and facing the enemies, that is contained in the seventh house, but in some way in also Libra? Even though houses and signs are very different, Libra also can represent enemies that we face to face as well. Because this is what happens when we finally start to have relationships with other people, with another person in the world. We may fall in love, or we may have to fight that other person for our right to be who we are, to be ourselves, to occupy space, and to be in this world. After all, we all have an Aries in our charts, and we are individualized units of consciousness that have to meet other individualized units of consciousness with as much right to be on the world as we are. It's an Aries meeting another Aries, but only that when we, the Aries, meet another Aries, we meet them as a Libra. The other Aries becomes a Libra, becomes another person with whom we need to balance the scales to find fairness in a just way where hopefully we both get what we want, and we offer the best part of us that we feel comfortable sacrificing for another person that we, Venus, love. After all, the sun gets weak in the Libra sign. It goes in exile, because it's not just about the self anymore. The sun is usually exalted in Aries because the individual self gets prominence, gets power and strength to think about its own self. But when it goes to Libra, when sun goes to Libra, it goes into fall. There, it will lose that kind of prominence of self, because it now needs to sacrifice the self to give space also for another person. In marriage or romance, as we see through songs and movies, romance and books, the exaltation of romance, love of Venus, which is the goddess of love, is Piscean. Venus will exalt in Pisces. And when we think about it, is this very much sacrificing of oneself for another person, oneself for the whole, oneself for God, for the divine, for this unconditional love. But when we think about it, if we look at the fact that Venus rules Libra and it exalts in Pisces, it's kind of like showing us an indication, a root of how there's this overreacted expression as well sometimes of love, of the Libra love, of I will give anything for you, I can't live without you, I will do anything for you, that we hear so much in movies, in the songs, in the books, in the romances. So here the I, Aries, is sacrificed for another. But it takes two to tango. So this axis is always about finding a way of having two whole people relating to each other in a balanced way. It's not about the disappearance of one for another. It's not about imposing one on the other, but more about seeing oneself in the other in a very empathetic way, that we treat the other in the same way that we would like to be treated, without losing ourselves in the process. And in this chart of the full moon, Venus is sextiling Neptune, which is a secondary ruler of Pisces. Though it can very much be great for romance, for us to have a nice, cozy relationship, a nice, inspired romantic behavior with our beloved, and have a more conscious and more spiritualized relationship, it can also stimulate a little bit this romantic Venus kind of sacrificial fantasies of I can't live without you, I'll do anything for you, that lead us to lose ourselves in the other instead of finding ourselves in the other, and miss the middle point between Aries and Libra. Another thing about the degrees of this moon is that this moon is in Via Combusta. We usually don't talk so much about Via Combusta in mundane astrology, but Via Combusta is usually the degrees between the 15th degree of Libra and the 15th degree of Scorpio. And it generally means that this period of time is really not great to start anything, is not very favorable to period of time. Is not good to make any decisions or make any majorly important life-changing things, as the full moon will amplify energies also in an erratic, crazy way. That's usually the tendency for the full moon. Just be mindful of what you do during this full moon, because it will be at 16 degrees, so already in Via Combusta. Try to keep away from breakups, from intense fights, arguments, signing contracts, starting a new business or project. I would definitely not recommend that you do this during this full moon. So the Sun will be in exaltation in Aries in this full moon and conjuncting Jupiter. We might feel more expansive, confident, and full of ourselves, optimistic about life, wanting to connect to higher ideals, feeling the sense of a higher purpose, wanting to connect to higher truths, with a sense of expansion in connection to the universe, wanting to live the present moment, every moment, feeling larger than life, and that we can take on the world. But given this full moon, this might lead us as well on the shadow side to overreact, to have behaviors that can come across as arrogance, selfishness, pride, narcissism, greediness, being overly ambitious, that wants to cross others to get what he wants, will step on whoever is in the way to get what he wants, to be a know-it-all, to have this attitude of my way or the highway, needing to have the last word, want to be the one who's right. Jupiter is also the midpoint of Sun and the dwarf planet Aries. And why am I talking about this? Because coming from what I just said, this kind of things can actually have a bigger manifestation. So Aries with an E, the dwarf planet, usually represents discord, but also she fights for what she believes. She fights for the truth and she doesn't give up. So we might feel more like fighting for what we believe and the things that matter to us, but also this kind of fighting for what we believe and wanting to have the last word can manifest even more. But we can also see this happening in the world. And in a positive way, we can see more of a calling of justice, of revolutions, of wanting to defend those who are weak, or those who need protection, or those who are in some kind of peril or some kind of unfavorable situation. Aries will help us do that. However, sometimes we may not have the best approach to how we do it, or we may be completely shut down and have this closed mind to what another person is trying to tell us, to what another party is also trying to tell us. Uranus and the full moon have also a close in conjunction, which is a 150 degrees type of aspect, where the planets have nothing in common. This can bring about wanting to rebel against something that we can't quite see, or we haven't got clarity of results of what this rebelliousness can bring. It can also cause us to feel either like getting freed of certain relationships, or having certain cuts of connection with others, or feeling like not looking or relating to some people. Then there is Chiron in Aries, reflecting the individual wound, where we question our self-worth, where we might feel the imposter syndrome, where we are not sure of our self-confidence, capacities, or the right to think for ourselves, the right to be ourselves, the right to look after ourselves, to live for ourselves, as if this would be a huge offense to someone, to other people. Venus is the dispositor of Taurus and is exalted in Taurus, and Mars is the dispositor of the Sun, so the other side of the full moon, which is in Cancer. Mars in Cancer is much weaker than Venus, and so I would say that Venus conquers all with her love. Love is stronger than war. Mars is out of bounds, and planets out of bounds tend to have a kind of a more Uranian type behavior. They can act in unexpected, weird, eccentric ways. And so having a Mars out of bounds can trigger us into certain behaviors and attitudes that come out of nowhere. But we have Saturn trining Mars, providing us a more kind of cold, executive energy to channel it in a more structured, in a more thoughtful, mature way, to achieve our goals, to go for what we want, to exercise more mature, careful decisions, and having a more structured, a more down-to-earth process of our affairs and even relationships. Mercury is in the midpoint of Saturn and Mars, sextiling the two, which can be great for determination in overcoming difficulties, having endurance, having more focus, but can also give ways to compartmentalize things a little bit much and not really think of others, causing separation. As Pluto is squaring Mercury and the North Node in this midpoint, take it easy in your mind. Don't overreact with the external influences of news, of outside information, of thoughts of death, of being isolated, being separated. It is also possible to get some negative information of something that happened in the world that can cause us to feel mentally exhausted or cause us to feel mentally drained. I already mentioned this, but Neptune is sextiling Venus. Venus is still in Taurus. So this is a great period to express love, spiritual and unconditional, but to also explore arts, to be around nature and connect with something deeper, something more divine, more spiritual, to relate to our beloved in a more spiritual, divine, conscious way. Or even to ourselves in a more divine, spiritual, conscious way. But this aspect is also great for arts, for music, for anything that makes us feel connected to something more sublime. Pluto is trining Venus, And Pluto, when Pluto has aspects to Venus, it can give rise to a lot of passion, a lot of intense love, because Pluto is a very sexual planet. It rules Scorpio, and so it can bring this aspect as well. However, even though it might be present, my recommendation is to perhaps wait a few days with this full moon, after the full moon, because it's also in Via Combusta and it may not have the best results. It may be intense, but the intensity of Pluto sometimes causes a little bit of a nuclear reaction. Uranus is conjunct with Venus, which can bring unexpected things in the areas of love, finances, self-love, art, or pleasure, causing either new things to start or to suddenly break up, suddenly finish, suddenly end. It can bring gains or losses in these areas. However, the overall sense here is of finding freedom, of feeling free to love oneself, feeling free to be oneself, feeling free to just love, to just be joyful and have pleasure, free to just be feeling good and feeling great in our bodies. That sense of, like, if you saw an ad of this woman kind of feeling like she's flowing in her beautiful dress on the street because she feels so free. That's kind of the image here. This full moon is also conjuncting the fixed star Sagittarius, which is a star that's connected and is really good for public speaking, and it has a nature that combines Mercury and Saturn. So all type of kind of structured thinking, science, engineering, reason, realism, but also very much maturity and a subtle mind can be great influences from this star. However, in the shadow side, it can also be a little bit psychopathic and can show shameless liars or having the loss through friends, having some losses through friends and companies. So be aware of these things as well. And so after all of this, what to pay attention during this full moon? Find the balance between self-love and loving another person. Find ways to harmonize your relationships without you losing yourself in those relationships. Add some sense of adventure, excitement, and a common vision, spiritual practice to your romantic relationship. Pay attention to sudden situations of arguments or fights and try to postpone this to a later date. Avoid potential breakups or severing of relationships. Find your own voice and right to be unique and looking after yourself. You have a right to exist, but so do others. So find a fair balance between you and others. Redefine your boundaries, explore your own uniqueness, because this will also allow you to explore another person's uniqueness. Explore romance, romantic relationships, and how not to lose yourself in those relationships. And that is it, dear sinceres. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If so, please remember to press like, comment, and share it with your friends. And please also help me bring you more videos to you by subscribing to this channel